All right, we seem to be tapering off. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to Focus Friday. There's a lot of new names here actually on today's list, so that's really exciting. Focus Friday is something that we at HESA have been doing this year, basically every other Friday, just bringing people together to chat about different things in higher education. Been having a lot of fun with it so far. We're coming to the end of our sessions for this year, and so I asked Pat here to come in and have some fun with me because I think we're at the fun point of the year. Um, Focus Friday, how this works if you haven't been here before is in the, kind of the first half an hour. I'm gonna pester Pat with a whole bunch of data misconceptions, a full page worth actually, if you're all so curious. Um, and after that, there's a second half an hour where you can pester Pat with all of your data misconceptions, and he's going to answer all of them, or we're going to have the most fun time ever. So, if we could maybe get things started by introducing ourselves in the chat, who we are, what we do, where we're from, maybe one of our big data misconceptions that could be fun later. I would love for that to happen. And Pat, maybe I'll give you a minute to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. My name is Pat Lougheed, as Tiffany pointed out. I am the co-founder at Plaid Analytics. We are a relatively small higher education focused consulting group primarily based out of British Columbia. We're kind of all over the province. Um, and part of the reason that we focus on higher ed is because one, it's our background, and two, it's something that we're quite passionate about. We uh, Myself, I spent 15 years within the walls of, in particular, Simon Fraser University here in British Columbia, where I worked in student services and I worked in IT in an academic unit, and so have a fair amount of experience, not only with the data side of things, but also with what is it the university actually does, or college as appropriate. So we worked with institutions from Vancouver Island all the way to the other side of the country. We've done some work down into California and other places in the United States. So yeah, lots of interesting stories and lots of time spent looking at different data sets.
Fantastic. Yeah, Plaid is one of our partners here at HESA, and we really enjoy working with them. And I think we do better work together, bringing together a lot of kind of that data side in with our usual strat planning. So it's really great to have you, Pat. We're going to start off, and basically how this is going to go is I am going to read off some common data misconceptions that I get to hear uh, on a daily basis, pretty much, and we're going to chat about them. So the first one, and I'm sure that this is something everyone in this room has heard if you've been around the block in the data world. We're data rich, but we're insight poor. Is this true at institutions, Pat? Or is it a bit of a cop out of a statement? Where do you see real data breakdowns happening?
Um, I think to a large extent it's both. So I think it's a cop out in that a lot of the time the insight isn't the problem. The insights are there. It's any action resulting from the insight. It's turning that into a decision or something that the institution does differently. Um, let's be honest, there's a lot of constraints within the institution, whether that's time or money or people to do the work or collective agreements that constrain particular decisions. Um, and navigating those can be very difficult. And so the insight just kind of sits there and does nothing. I think it's actually true from the sense that institutions often lack the data expertise, the time, the resources, the people that are knowledgeable about bringing the data together and often analyzing the data they do have. And part of the reason for that, to me, is that there's very few organizations, frankly, on the face of the planet that are analogous to a university or a college, either in the Canadian or American context, but elsewhere in the world too. You've got nine or more figure budgets. You've got they're effectively real estate holders. They're often landlords if they have residents. They're often utility companies that run their own steam plants, or we have institutions in this country that have their own nuclear reactors, maybe not for utilities, but they're there. They're research enterprises, and that's all before we even get to teaching students. Here in BC, because we like being special, we have an institution that's effectively its own municipality and runs its own garbage trucks. Like we run the gamut. Um, and then you get into the decentralization, right? Faculty A never does things the same way as faculty B. And so trying to get data from actually across the institution is very, very hard. And trying to spend the time and having the expertise to actually bring all of that together, I think is incredibly difficult.
Now, I told you that I was going to remove this one because it has come up. I think you said the answer is close to the same,
Yeah.
but a few people brought it up in their registration. More data is better. So if we're data rich and insight poor, is more data better?
So I think the answer depends a little bit on what we mean by more. More of the same data isn't usually terribly helpful. And there's one caveat to that I'll come back to in a sec. But it's very easy for us to get overwhelmed and say, if we connect another day, another week, another month, or whatever of the same data, we'll know what to do. And no, you won't. Like honestly, from that particular context, you probably already have enough data. Um, Getting data more frequently, I think, can be very helpful. We still see a lot of institutions that, have operated, at least on the student side of things, where they take snapshots of data at their census dates, once in winter, spring, once in summer, once in fall, and that's the data that they operate off of. And that doesn't really give institutions the ability to adjust as you go through an enrollment cycle or an admission cycle, and being able to get data on a daily basis rather than on a monthly or every couple of quarters through a particular cycle, I think can be very helpful because it allows institutions to be a lot more nimble than they currently are. But I think what can be much more effective from the kind of more data perspective is taking a different lens and asking different questions of different data. So, if students aren't registering for some set of courses, rather than just wait for more data and see if they magically start registering, go ask them. Or look at financial aid data. Maybe something changed there. Or gather information from other institutions, what's happening elsewhere in the system. Are they seeing the same thing? Departments spending more all of a sudden, maybe, or electricity usage in a building has changed, or, go look at the data from different ways. Don't just assume that having more of the same data is going to be able to ask questions. I will, the secret, if there is one, is knowing when more data from different lenses is going to be diminishing returns, right? Like there's always one more data set you could look at. And so I think before going and collecting and analyzing more data, it's use the hell yeah or no model, right? If this data shows me this, am I going to do something different? Versus if it shows me this. Like if the answer to that is maybe, don't bother. Like, yeah.
The next one that I have for you, and this is one of my favorite ones because it makes most of my colleagues roll their eyes. And so I find it quite entertaining. If we just had better dashboards, we'd make better decisions. How much of that challenge is actually a technical dashboard versus cultural, organizational, strategic decision making?
So I think dashboards are really good for tracking and monitoring well-defined operational processes. You need to track an admission cycle or a course registration cycle, or you need to compare spending, year to date or hiring. or back to the electricity example, like dashboards are really good for all of that, right? Like what the process is, what the metrics are. Let's monitor it, make sure things aren't changing underneath us. I think they're a lot less good at figuring out why something's happening, or giving a sense of what might happen in the future. And they certainly can't tell you what to do next. Um, they're not going to fix decision making. Like no dashboard is ever going to fix decision making. At least anything more complicated than should I put on another section of English 100. Um, decision making is inherently a political process, and I use that in the kind of Aristotelian sense of politics. Engaging in discourse and having reasoned arguments and thinking through the different possibilities. And improving decision making is more cultural and organizational than it is about, oh, if we just had this better thing over here. Will more data help? I mean, go back to my previous answer. Yeah, quite possibly. Will it solve anything? No. Like, no.
I asked someone this morning, a director of an IR shop, if their IRs focus more on information giving or strategic decision making. And I find that is one of the most kind of interesting questions to reflect on, especially in the IR space. I've been to a few of the SERPA conferences, and I think kind of watching what people do with their data at their institutions always quite an interesting one.
Yes.
At that same conference, SERPA is the IR conference in Canada, uh, Institutional Research and Planning. I think it's in Hamilton this coming fall. I could be wrong. Waterloo, Hamilton, somewhere in Southern Ontario
Hamilton.
this fall.
That's right.
It'll be fun. I'm gonna go this year. Um, it's my favorite conference. My One of the things that I heard at my very first conference is there. It was actually the keynote title of my first SERPA conference. Data results in more objective decision making. Does data, from your perspective, Pat, depoliticize decisions, or does it give people a way to defend decisions that they've already had made?
So maybe this is a hot take, maybe not. I don't think data is objective. Um, I don't think it's ever objective. And part of the reason for that is that there's always context to data. There's decisions made about how that data got collected, why it got collected, who collected it, what form, whether it gets shared, whether it gets saved, who gets to see it, all of that. Like there's very little in the way of the data world, particularly within the institutional context, that is like objective data. One of my this might be a very IR joke, but um, if you get asked how many students do we have, well, there's about 1,200 answers to that, right? Um, and so, yeah, so I think it's not really objective. So back to it's subjective. Is it going to depoliticize decisions? No. Like data doesn't actually tell you what to do. It reflects what has happened. It can't tell you what is going to happen. And back to that decision making being political in the broadest sense. I don't think trying to depoliticize um, decision making is the right approach. I mean, politics is the um, art of making compromises and bringing different groups together. And quite frankly, that's what we need to do within institutions. It's not about being able to point at some data set and it says, you know, this says we do this and we go off and do that and all is merry. Like that's not the way the world works, and it's certainly not the way that institutions work or are set up.
I didn't give you this one in the list, but it did come up in the comments that kind of came in advance with people registering. So, Plaid, you folks work really kind of as like data consultants. We work as kind of strategic consultants at HESA. And, one of the comments that came up in our data misconceptions was that foolish consulting data can lead to atrocious plans. So let's talk about garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
A common statement.
Yep.
If you put bad things in, you're going to get bad things out.
Yep.
But I'm curious, how do you know when something is garbage going in?
Well, there's a fascinating question. I think a lot of it is really about um, interrogating the data and asking questions of it, and being willing to, and I bring this from the consultant perspective, often outside the walls. You know, I don't know everything about an institution. Um, Frankly, I suspect there's lots of people inside the institution too that don't know everything that's going on. So really having a partner that you can work with, that you can ask questions and say, hey, look, this looks weird. Like, let's figure out what's going on here. And sometimes the answer is going to come back and go, oh, well, yeah, we don't trust that. And you go, okay, so yeah, that we're just going to ditch that and forget it. And other times it's going to come back and go, well, we made this change in a process 2 years ago. And so everything before this kind of reflects this and everything since, oh, okay, well, that's totally understandable. And that I can see that in the data. And okay, we can, caveat that or whatever we need to do. But I think a lot of what we find is just, oh, the data's in the system, so it must be good. And that approach I think is most definitely the wrong approach to take. Understanding the data is, yeah, it's critical. We have also spent a lot of time over the last number of years trying to build out more automated testing. Like just being able to look as we work with institutional data sets, being able to go, okay, this is what we're seeing today. Is that actually what we're going to see going forward? As we do things like, as I mentioned, moving from 3 times a year reporting to daily reporting. Part of the way to do that is to automate and be able to say, okay, we expect the data to look like this. Is it actually going to look like that going forward? And being able to see, if that changes, actually being able to do that proactively, rather than all of a sudden going, hey, we built this report and the data doesn't look like we expected it to see. So that's one of the other pieces I bring up.
Faculty don't engage with data. That is the next one that I hear quite commonly. How do you perceive that one?
Um, so generally, I think it's well, nonsense is, and and part of the reason I say that is because if nothing else, research is by definition data gathering. Um, but even if we just take this from kind of the lens of administrative data, I think it's far too broad a generalization. Are there some that don't engage with the data? Absolutely. Are there some that do? Yes, absolutely. I've known more than my share of faculty members who will quite happily, work with administrative units to really dig into different data that might be around the institution and come up with different ways of looking at it. I think what we often see is that faculty will engage with data within the ambit of their role at the university, right? Um, so if you've got a faculty member who, for the last 10 years, has only taught 2 courses, and they teach the same 2 courses year after year, like they're probably going to be interested in data from those 2 courses and not a whole lot else. But if that same faculty member became an undergraduate program chair in the department, well, maybe now they want to look at all the courses, or then they become, a chair, director, whatever of the department, and then finance and HR, and they're going to start looking at other things, and maybe an associate dean or a dean. Like we can't, we often, and I would say the other piece of this is often as institutions we don't do a good job of kind of inviting people in to look at the data either. So if often the data is, it's kind of walled off and we say, well, don't go looking at this unless you have this set of permissions. We can't really expect faculty members to then go, oh, but let me go through all the gates in order to get to the data and then engage with it. I think one of the biggest problems is we can't say we only want you to engage with the data that we want you to engage with when we want you to engage with it. Like, A, that's not how the world works, and it's definitely not how faculty members work. Um, Institutions are not always particularly transparent about their data. And so I think there's a trade-off there. I think it's if everything's going to be kind of walled off, then you can't really expect everybody to engage with only your small set of data.
Trying to figure out which one I want to go with next based off of that. I have two options that this can go in.
Okay.
Gonna go to the IR side.
All right.
Institutional research offices are the bottleneck and the barrier to getting data out across the institution. Is
Okay.
that a fair
So
characterization? And
so my co-founder Andrew is I think has just in the last 5 minutes started an Ask Me Anything with the Serpa group that Tiffany currently mentioned. So I'm hoping all of the IR folks are over there, and I'm not going to irritate any of them. Although I do see a name or two, and I might get hunted down in October at the Serpa conference. Are they a bottleneck? Yes. Is it their fault? No. And now that I've probably irritated absolutely everyone with that response. Um, IR offices occupy a weird position, right? They're responsible for government reporting. There's lots of other external reporting and lots of internal reporting. And let's be honest, the amount of that reporting is markedly more than it was 5, 10, 15, 50 years ago. Um, they're often responsible for, miscellaneous projects across the institution, from the board, the president on down. And everybody wants their questions answered. And, quite frankly, the board and the president usually want it answered yesterday. Um, so like, are they a bottleneck? Like in the sense that there's a lot of work that gets piled on IR units. Yeah. Um, and I would say the other thing that we forget about is it's not just institution, it's research, right? Research, ask any faculty member, research takes time. Like you have to figure out what needs to be analyzed. You need to figure out what data to bring in. All like that takes time. So institutional research by definition is not it's not a quick process. It takes time. Um, and then back to how diverse institutions are, right? Trying to like IR can't really be expected or shouldn't really be expected to me to know absolutely everything about the way every faculty operates or the way that facilities and finance do things. Like it's just such a wide um, swath of what's happening that expecting one unit that sits at the center to know everything about what's going on is frankly foolhardy. Now, my take, I think we could do a lot of good with having kind of a network of excellence center model where, we kind of have IR at the middle that is complemented or works with an IT unit that actually has data engineering and data expertise, knows where all the systems are, knows how to bring data from all those systems. But then building up data and analytics capacity in business line units, right? Student services, build a data shop. Facilities, build a data shop. Finance, build a data shop. And then have IR work with all of those, deal with projects that kind of cross the institution and major business areas. But, if somebody's just asking about admissions, well, we got a data shop and student services for that. If they're just asking about finance, we got a different data shop for that, right? Um, but Yeah, lots of IR shops are, I would say, very under-resourced for what they're asked to do.
Are there institutions in Canada that have that kind of data shops embedded in specific units?
We do see it in places. I'm a bit biased in this because I mean that's effectively what I built at Simon Fraser University. I built the data and analytics unit that worked in student services, and we focused on, the kind of non-external reporting bits, and we did a lot of enrollment cycle and admission cycle. We looked at financial aid, we looked at graduation, we did all of those things, and you know, we had a very good working relationship with the institutional research folks. So they came to us all the time and said, "Hey, help us figure out what's going on here." And we, um, in turn, we would have requests that would, well, I need this. Well, we're not the people to talk to. Go talk to IR, right? I don't want to give you a different answer than you're going to get in the official reporting either. So, um, I don't know of an institution that has explicitly embarked on doing this and building it everywhere. That may not mean that it's not happening. It just means that I don't know about it. But I think that there's definitely lots of institutions where there are different units in different places that work well together. I think it's just kind of scaling that and leveraging that more.
Next common misconception: faculty and staff just need more training to use data effectively at their institutions. Is this really a skills issue? Is it an access issue? Is it an incentive issue? What is it true? Period.
Um, so I would I would probably reframe this and say, separate out like what do we mean by use? Do they need to be able to be data engineers? No, they probably shouldn't need to do that. Um, can we talk about consuming data more effectively, like essentially from a data literacy perspective? Yes, and to be very clear, I don't think that's remotely unique to faculty and staff. I th I think at the moment, with all sorts of the societal changes that we have going on, I think frankly that is a universal statement that we could all become better at data literacy. Um, it takes skill and it takes experience, and it's really not that different from teaching or advising or managing people or coaching. It's not a skill set that everybody has. It's not a skill set that everybody needs to have for their particular role. But lots of people do need it, and so it's you know I think it's something that we need to figure out ways to build up that skill set and have people exercise that muscle more, right? And I don't think that that's um, something that institutions are always utterly fantastic at. You know, Many years within the walls of the institution, I certainly would have loved more kind of skills and coaching and stuff like that that I could have gotten through HR. And I think they're moving in a much better direction than that now, generally. Um, but I think the other thing is people need to have a reason. They need to want to do these things. Um, so I think part of the goal for institutions should be really helping um, faculty and staff see how can data help them be better in their role, or help them make a decision or understand something happening around. I don't think that's something that it tends to just be we need to do this more. Well, why? And I don't think that's a hard question to answer. I just don't think institutions really engage with and answer it all that much.
Now, the one that you sent me that I didn't even think of, that I am horrified that this is what you put in your common misconceptions, actually. The dashboard is dead. We can all have mixed opinions on how we feel about dashboards. We're just going to go straight to AI tools that will build analytics for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now to be I don't know how much we've heard this in higher education yet, but we are certainly hearing it in other industries, right? Where it's people are just like, no, we're just going to feed all of our data into the AI machine, and it's going to tell us everything. And um, there may be a little bit of a kernel of truth to this, but quite frankly, I don't think that most institutions are ready to connect AI in their data. And part of that is, um, from a data governance perspective. Back to the question, if you ask an AI, how many students do we have? Is it going to know how to interpret that question? The answer is probably no. Um, going through a data governance process and actually being able to define what what the different data points you have are and how different systems connect and who's responsible for the data. Like that to me is a fairly critical exercise to do before you can even really think of bringing AI into the conversation. Otherwise, all you're going to do is you're going to get a wrong answer faster, which isn't going to be particularly helpful to anyone. You got to walk before you can run effectively. And we've seen this before. There's lots of institutions that started down the path of building a data warehouse, um, only to have that project fail, right? Like this is that version two. There's steps that you need to take before you can even think about connecting AI to data. And feel how you want about dashboards. Again, there is a place where dashboards fill a very vital role. And I don't really see, whatever future systems we bring, I don't see those taking over that role because they can't do it better, faster, cheaper, what have you. Um, why spend the effort there? But going forward, yeah, like spend some time on data governance, I think, I think is what I'm saying.
Be curious, folks, how many of your institutions do or do not have data governance policies? I've been reading through some institutions, and some of them are definitely ill-equipped, let's say, to handle AI and what AI and student data might look like in particular. So just putting that one out there. Um, this is the part of the conversation where I say, folks, it's your turn to ask Pat all the questions. So I've seen some in the chat already. I saw one from Andrew Wilson, not Andrew Drinkwater. Andrew, if you're still here and want to chat about um, how you can get better at sharing data with each other so we can support students better, I'd be curious to hear a bit from your perspective on kind of what that might look like from you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem, Tiffany. Sorry, it took me. I'm not used to Zoom, so I was like, "Where's the, where's the unmute?" So the question really, I was at an institution. Obviously, they were collected a lot of data, and it was very informative. I would say I was somewhat data savvy, so I could use the data to actually make some decisions, operational decisions, to support incoming students. But the question really is, a lot of institutions do a lot of good work with this data, and I've attended a few conferences where IR folks talk about all the data and the lovely stuff that they do, but it's very siloed. So it's siloed to the institution. In order to make really educated decisions, you actually need to share and see what's happening in your partners in the education sector to be able to support students, because sometimes you need to see not at the very granular level of this, like the student record level, but you really need to see what's happening in order to better support the demographic of students who are coming to your institution, and what opportunities may exist or don't exist, or where's how you can, like, that kind of information. And when we don't share that information, we're operating in the silo, and you can't rely on PCIS because it's 18 months old. And so how do you
At best.
right? So how do you actually, and we're all in the system, and but this is one of those things that we can't wait for government to do it. This would be I would see a game changer about actually supporting our institutions and supporting the students and our alumni and all sorts of things. If we can get on the same page and actually support each other. And
Yeah.
so that's the sort of, I guess, thing I'm asking is like, we're all doing this work, and this would be one of those things where we could get some extra data. Where's the willingness to actually do it? Ignoring all the policies and everything else. If we wanted to do it, what's the barrier to doing it? Because ultimately it supports the students, and
Yeah.
that's why we're all here.
Yeah. Um, I 100% agree with you. And I think what I find most fascinating about this is I think that there is lots of data sharing that happens between institutions. It just happens at a level of, the same unit at different institutions is talking, they'll talk with each other, but it doesn't become kind of this wholesale exercise to really be able to do that. And so you know, to try and get this, we all have our little pockets of what's happening across the system, but it's only within, as you say, a particular silo. Um, and I'm not, to be entirely honest, I think a lot of it's cultural. Like it's just the way, and I know Alex from HESA has banged the drum about this for years and years and years. It's, we don't like sharing data in Canada. We don't. We're not very good at it. Here in BC, at the risk of irritating at least five IR directors here. Um, we have this thing called the Central Data Warehouse where post-secondary institutions report data into the BC government every I think twice a year. And when that was set up, it was embedded within the College and University Act, and the research universities basically got to say, no, we're not gonna put that data in. And I mean, that was 25 plus years ago. Like it's been a long time, but nobody's really revisited that. Despite those of us that occasionally do research projects within the system going, like, if we could just get everything in one place, like we would have one place to go for all the data rather than going around to every institution and begging for a different slice. Um, and I know that there are attempts. So, U15, as an example, I think that the institutional research directors at U15 institutions share data. I don't know exactly how regularly, but I know that they share a much wider swath of data um, than pretty much anybody outside the U15 has ever been able to do. So, really, I think it comes back to how do we build up the culture that says, this is student focused, and build out this capacity to have system-wide conversations. I wish I knew the answer to how to get there. I really did, but maybe if we just keep banging the drum, we'll get there.
I did just put an example in the chat. I don't know, I haven't looked in a while to see if they're still updating this, but the people who used to shock me the most on sharing data was Brandon University. They share so much of their data in publicly accessible dashboards, and they are a small IR team. Um, and I, I think they're a great institutional example of, here's some public data that I think is commonly asked for, and they used to do very well. Like I said, I haven't looked at this in a long time, so I apologize if it's completely out of date. But they used to do very well at kind of building that data literacy into their data because you can see massive drops, for example, in some of their metrics. And it's like, oh, we recategorize this into here this year. So
Yeah.
like that's why you see a data drop. And it's quite nice. Um, Pat, I would be interested to hear your perspective. I saw Vikramji put in the chat, is more data equal better decision making the wrong starting point? And then I saw some other comments in here about, data being walled off because you can kind of misuse data, if you will, if you don't really know the full context behind it. Some other commentary on kind of data literacy. Walk me through, in your opinion, what would be the ideal way to solve a problem with data?
A
What's the
problem?
yeah, let's pick on a problem. Students from program X are no longer being retained at the same rate that they used to be.
Right. Um, so, um, one of the comments is should institutions instead start with a clear goal and work backwards? Um, and yes, to me, it's part of this goes back to institutions are so diverse. Like there is no world in which you're going to be able to kind of bring all of the data within the institutional walls into a place and be able to answer all questions. Like that's just not going to happen. And so really to me, starting with, what is the question? What is it that you're trying to answer? This kind of goes back to some of my earlier comments about kind of institutional research capacity too, because if you're going to start with kind of clear goals and work backwards to the data needed and then collect that data, like you need the capacity, you need the people to be able to do that. And that is not something that every institution has or has built up. Um, to me, to your scenario there, Tiffany, it's really being able to go, okay, like what if we have students in a program and they're not retaining, like what are the different things that could affect that? Where can we get that data? What of it is within institutional control versus what of it's going to be outside the walls? Maybe they're not retaining because there is some company out there that's throwing six figures, for second years. Well, that's not something that we can necessarily control, but it's also not something that we're necessarily going to have internal data about either. And so really it's, figuring like what is the question you're going to ask? Where is that data living? How do we collect it all and how do we analyze it? I think where the flip side of that is having some pre-constructed data sets that can answer many of those questions can be really helpful, so that you don't have to go collect financial aid data from scratch every time you need to look at it, but having a pre-existing financial aid data set that covers, here's the financial aid data the institution already has. It's in a table somewhere. People know how to access it and know the context and build up so that every time you're not kind of having to rebuild that institutional context every time you need to ask a question. And I'm picking on financial aid, but it applies to basically any subject area. So part of it to me is and where I would love to see an institution go is the concept of you may have heard of the concept of a data lake, but basically bringing in all of your data from one place. Like the notion is that kind of sits before a data warehouse. You bring all the data in, but you're not necessarily doing all of the cleaning, all of the transformation, but at least it's somewhere where you can access it, right? The number of institutions that have a CRM and there's data that lives in the CRM, but trying to report on any of that data is impossible because it lives up in the cloud somewhere, and maybe you get an Excel report and that's that. But like being able to bring in some of that data, so at least it's in a place where when the IR shop or whoever else needs access to it, it's already there. They don't have to go out and pull it from everywhere. And that's kind of where I see IT coming in too, right? Is IT has the expertise to bring in that data, to maintain that data. Like that shouldn't be, somebody in student services just not going to have that capacity, right? So building that out. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I think you need to approach it from both ends, right? It's have the data in a place that's accessible, have as much info, have the data governance to know what those different data pieces mean, how they connect with one another, but also really approach it from the perspective of here's the thing we need to figure out, build up the capacity to do that from a people perspective and a technology perspective, whatever you do, and attack things that way. I hope that was at least semi-coherent.
I followed, but I have 10 more questions now.
Okay.
How would you just talked about creating a data lake and like having these access points, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are steps that people, let's say within the roles sitting in this call, could do to work towards that, even when they are probably right now overburdened, under resourced, and probably not going to get any more resources to do anything more in the next few years. Was that bleak enough?
Well, and yeah, I'm with you. Um, so to me, a lot of this kind of starts with not necessarily one of the things that we see, institutions all like to implement lots of new systems, right? It's, oh, we're going to bring in this other system here. It's going to help us with this little thing in this little faculty over here. So part of it is trying to peel some of that back rather than implementing a bunch of new systems, which all of a sudden new data needs to connect to, or now you've got the same data in a different place and somebody's handling. Like, spend some time actually inventorying where data currently lives and then seeing about bringing it together because like lots of systems already have the capacity to build in those kind of reporting layers to it, like bring in the data into a data lake or somewhere where at least it's centrally accessible. But it doesn't mean, I mean, most institutions, certainly the ones that I'm aware of and have worked with, like they're not doing that. Um, you know, the one of the places where I think AI is really interesting and has the ability to speed some things up is really on the coding side of things, right? One of the things like even 5 years ago, being a data engineer and bringing data from all these systems, you needed to know so many different things. You don't necessarily need to know that now because if you can like I need a tool that will pull data out of this system. Here's the API definition, and here's where the data needs to land. Go off and Claude or whatever else will build it. Um, I have a lot of issues with AI. One of the things I think about AI in the coding space is very different from AI in like a writing space or something like that. In no small part because of the way that open source software has been constructed over the years, and the licensing that goes along with that. Um, and so really leaning into that ability to bring in data from different places and actually have it centralized. Um, I think is something that institutions could do in a way that would be very beneficial to their analytics capacity going forward. You're right. We're not going to get more resources. We're not going to get more ability to do this going forward. But I also think there's possibilities of to Andrew's point, being able to leverage some of this across institutions, right? Starting to see more desire to do some of this stuff at the system level. We here in BC, we have a post-secondary system review that's been initiated by the government, and apparently the document's been sitting on somebody's desk for a month, and they haven't released it yet. But there's certainly a whole.
Apparently, it'll be out before December 31st.
Well, that's
Whoa!
sometime in the next 7.5 months. That'll be great. But there's certainly a lot of institutions that are fully expecting that that's going to say everybody should move to a common SIS, and of course, everybody is quite rarely cringing at that. But and whether that happens or not is a whole separate question. But being able to think about the ways that data actually does look the same across institutions. We spent a lot of years as a sector where everything is a snowflake, everything needed a particular response, a particular custom built scenario for this one little thing. Um, and quite frankly, that's really not the case. There's lots of places where things are actually pretty similar, either within an institution across faculties or business units, or even across institutions. They look pretty similar. And so being willing to have those conversations about no, no, where are we actually unique and where are there lots of similarities? Yeah.
What do you think? the role of institutional data will play in the next 5 years?
Um, well, so where I hope institutional data, where I hope or where I think, those may
Both.
be two different things. Those may
Yeah,
be two different
both.
things. But to be honest, I think the next 5 years are going to be very interesting for this system. I think we're going to have some hard conversations. Um, and I think the more that we can inform those conversations with um, data uh, that institutions may already have, I think would be quite helpful. Back to my comment, it's not going to solve anything, shouldn't solve like decision making about where institutions go in the future. Like those are going to require a lot of conversations and they're going to require lots of frankly deep thinking. But I think data can play a role in that and should play a role in that. Um, I think that can look in slightly different forms. We have lots of deferred maintenance. Probably the word that's going to cause lots of people to just cringe and go running. But okay, let's think about deferred maintenance. How does that impact what the budget's going to be the next 5 years? Like, what do we need to do? What shouldn't we do? How do we approach this differently in different scenarios here? Um, and being able to willing and able to engage with the data to have those hard discussions. Um, I think there's lots of different ways that can be brought in. But I think we have to be willing to ask the hard questions, and I think we need to be willing to actually spend the time doing the data gathering and the data analysis for those. Do I think that's going to happen? I hope. I think it's going to happen at some institutions. I think it's going to depend very much on institutional culture, and some will be able to do that, and some, I'm a little bit more pessimistic on, but we can hope.
My last question for you, and then we'll wrap up. The thing about data is that it can lead you to bad decisions overall. Like that that is life.
Yeah.
And putting my consulting hat on for a minute, a lot of folks turn to consulting firms to look at kind of bottom line data and make decisions solely off of bottom line data. If you were sitting in an institution who, let's say, is undergoing an efficiency review of some sort, what how would you convey, how would you recommend, oh, I don't even know. I'm trying not to ask this leading, but I don't know how to ask it in a non-leading way. What do you tell an outside consulting firm about what is actually important in your institution, even though it may not look great on a bottom line?
Um,
Recognizing they may not listen.
well, I guess the question is, are we talking from the perspective of the person who's paying the bills for the consulting firm or somebody else?
Go with the somebody else.
Um, I would hope um, that institutions would be engaging with consulting firms that, quite frankly, can be open-minded and ask questions. That may not necessarily always lead to the answers that everyone wants. But frankly, I think it's different institutions will have different contexts, right? And the I think part of the difficulty is really around kind of culture and trust and openness. And not every institution has all of those. And so, sometimes when a consultant comes in that's been brought on by somebody else, people are questioning the motives, right? I would certainly hope that as the person doing the hiring of the consultants, before they do that, they build up some of that understanding of what the scope is and build up some of that trust with the institutions that are going to be impacted and asked to really allow for that openness. Um, I don't know that helps helps the question, but like if you're kind of coming at it from the perspective of talking to consultants about different uh, kind of different elements of the data and what different areas of the institution are seeing it, part of it is um, frankly being willing to be open, right? It's the sorry, the only way out is through. And I think that's true for the next 5 years or however many years we're looking in the future. It's things are going to be bumpy. Being willing to say, here's the things that we're seeing, here's the things that we think are going to be problems in the future. Here's our constraints, frankly, and being open about the constraints too that you're seeing, and what you're trying to do. Like institutions are going to make different decisions about what's important to them. And but I would certainly hope that within the context of those conversations that they can be held openly and honestly. Maybe that's a pipe dream. I don't know that it answers your question, but yeah.
I don't think there is an answer to my question for what it's worth. I think there's 100 answers to my question. No single answer, a whole bunch of answers. Uh,
Yeah.
Folks, we are at time. Uh, Thank you so much for coming to this Focus Friday. I want to reiterate some things that were put into this chat. SERPA is coming up in the fall. They have a call for proposals out that is due on the 22nd. We at HESA are hosting AI Academy 2.0 uh, in the fall of this year, which will be happening at the University of British Columbia on November 9th and 10th. And we have a call for proposals out right now that will close on the 28th of May. So if you're interested in participating in that conference, I've heard some good things in here about things like benchmarking, about uh, different data standards, about what AI tools should be kind of brought in and implemented in institutional research. Those are all great topics, and I would love to hear you all talk about them at AI Academy in the fall. Pat, thanks so much for joining today.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.